My phone buzzed on the arm of the chair, a sharp, insistent vibration against the worn floral fabric. It was just after 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, the time of day when the sun slants through the living room window and illuminates the dust motes dancing in the air. I was reading a book, a simple pleasure I'd allowed myself more often since I retired. The buzz was for a text message, and I expected it to be my son, Michael, confirming his family's attendance for Sunday dinner. Instead, the notification was from my credit card company, a single, clean line of text against a white background. Thank you for your purchase of $11,432.18 at Air France. I stared at the numbers. $11,000. I lowered my reading glasses and held the phone closer, as if the proximity might change the digits. It did not. Below the amount was a confirmation number, a tidy string of letters and numbers that felt like a secret code I was never meant to decipher. But I knew that language. For 35 years, I had been a travel agent. I had built dream vacations for strangers, untangled flight cancellations during hurricanes, and navigated the intricate architecture of booking systems that most people never saw. I knew exactly what that code meant. Someone was going to Paris, and they were using my money to do it. My first thought was not of fraud or theft, not in the way a stranger breaks into your life. My first thought, a cold, smooth stone dropping into the pit of my stomach, was of my daughter-in-law, Tasha. I did not panic. My late husband, Robert, always said I had a preternatural calm in a crisis. When the pipes burst in the winter of '98, I was the one who found the main water shutoff in the dark while he was still trying to find a flashlight. When Michael fell from the oak tree in the backyard and broke his arm, I had him splinted with a ruler and a dish towel before the paramedics even arrived. My body registered the shock before my mind did. A chill spread from my chest outward, a slow-moving cold front that made the warm afternoon air feel suddenly thin. I set the phone down on the end table, perfectly parallel to the edge. I closed my book, marking my page with a ribbon. Then, and only then, did I allow myself to understand that the life I had carefully constructed, the one built on quiet generosity and the assumption of love, had just developed a hairline fracture. And I knew, with a certainty that was both dreadful and clarifying, that if I pressed on it, the whole thing might fall apart. For years, my home had been the family's center of gravity. It was a modest brick house in the 3rd Ward, the same one Robert and I bought when Michael was just a boy. It was filled with the scent of lemon polish and, on most days, something baking. Robert had passed 5 years ago, but his presence was still etched into the walls, in the worn spot on the carpet where his favorite chair used to be, in the shelf of gospel records he loved to play on Saturday mornings while I cooked breakfast. He believed in legacy. "We build something, Lorraine," he'd say, his large, warm hand covering mine. "Not just for us, for Michael, for his children. A foundation." I believed it too. That foundation, to me, meant providing comfort, stability, and the occasional luxury. After I retired, I had my pension, Robert's life insurance, and the money we'd so carefully saved. It was more than enough. So when Michael married Tasha, a woman with a taste for things that shimmered, I was happy to share. I paid for their down payment on their house in a new subdivision out near Pearland. I funded family vacations every other year, Disney World when the children, Jackson and Maya, were small, a Caribbean cruise 2 years ago. I never thought of it as a transaction. It was just what you did for family. You gave. Tasha accepted these gifts with a practiced grace that, over time, had begun to feel more like expectation. She was a beautiful woman, always impeccably dressed, her social media feed a curated gallery of brunches, new outfits, and smiling family photos, many of which were taken on the trips I had paid for. She called me Mama Lorraine, a term of endearment that had started to feel like a title, a role I was meant to perform. The generous matriarch. My credit card was saved in her airline profile. I had put it there myself 3 years prior to book a flight for her to visit her sister in Atlanta. It was a matter of convenience. I had told her to remove it afterward, but I suppose she had forgotten. Or, as the cold feeling in my chest now suggested, she had chosen not to. Apparently, ambition works both ways. You can build a foundation, and someone else can build a fantasy upon it. I picked up my phone again and typed the confirmation number into the airline's website. My fingers were steady on the keyboard. The muscle memory from my career was still sharp. I clicked, "Manage my booking." The itinerary bloomed on the screen, crisp and detailed. 2 first-class tickets from Houston to Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris, departing in 3 days. The passenger names were listed clearly: Michael Bishop and Tasha Bishop. Beneath their names were their seat assignments: 2A and 2B, window and aisle. They had pre-ordered the pan-seared sea bass for their in-flight meal. The level of detail was meticulous. This was not a mistake. This was a plan, a quiet, audacious, and extraordinarily expensive plan. There was even a note in the reservation for a bottle of champagne to be served after takeoff to celebrate a special anniversary. Their anniversary wasn't for another 6 months. I leaned back in my chair. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I could have called my bank and reported the card stolen. I could have canceled the charge in an instant, and that would have been the end of it. The tickets would have vanished, and Tasha would have been left with a canceled trip and a difficult explanation. But something held me back. It felt too simple, too clean. An act of fraud is impersonal. This was not. This was an act of profound intimacy. Tasha had used not just my money, but my trust. She had reached into the quiet, orderly space of my life and taken something, assuming I was too old, too distracted, or perhaps too foolish to notice. She was counting on my silence. She was counting on my love for my son to override my own dignity. And suddenly, I understood something. A simple cancellation would teach her nothing. It would be a problem she could explain away, a bank error, a website glitch. It would not force her to look at what she had done. It would not force Michael to see the woman he had married. No, I was a travel agent. I knew how the system worked. I knew about the invisible threads that held a reservation together, and I knew which ones, if pulled, could unravel the whole thing at the most inconvenient possible moment. A quiet authority began to settle over me, replacing the chill. I was not a victim, I was the card holder, and the card holder, I knew, held all the power. I closed the laptop. I had 3 days. I would let them think they were going to Paris. I would let them pack their bags and dream of champagne. I would let them get all the way to the airport. That Sunday, as always, Michael and his family came for dinner. The smell of roasted chicken and sweet potatoes filled the house, a scent that usually brought me a deep sense of peace. Today it felt like a stage set for a play I no longer wished to be in. Jackson and Maya, my grandchildren, ran in and hugged my knees, their energy a bright spot in the growing unease. Jackson was 10, all lanky limbs and serious questions. Maya was 7, with her father's smile and a boundless imagination. They were the reason I had always been so generous. I wanted them to have the world. Tasha swept in behind them, kissing the air near my cheek. "Mama Lorraine, it smells divine in here. You are a lifesaver. I have been running around all week. I am completely exhausted." She was wearing a new silk blouse and carrying a designer handbag I'd never seen before. She placed it on the hall table with a proprietary air, as if marking her territory. Michael followed, giving me a real hug that felt strained around the edges. He looked tired. There were new lines around his eyes. He worked hard as an architect, but I knew Tasha's desires often outpaced their income. He saw the handbag and a flicker of something, annoyance, resignation. Crossed his face before he smoothed it away. "Everything all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice a little too casual. "Everything is perfect, baby," I said, patting his arm. "Just happy to have you all here." We sat down to dinner, the table groaning with food I had lovingly prepared. Macaroni and cheese baked until the top was a perfect golden crust. Collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey, cornbread fresh from the oven. For a while, it almost felt normal. Jackson chattered about his science project, and Maya told us a long, rambling story about a magical squirrel. But I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. Tasha was practically vibrating with a barely contained excitement. "Michael and I have some exciting news," she announced, placing her fork down with a delicate clink. "Well, it's more of a surprise, really." She looked at Michael, a wide, brilliant smile on her face. He shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on his plate. "Oh?" I asked, my voice even. I took a slow sip of my sweet tea. "We're taking a little trip," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Just the two of us. A second honeymoon, you could say. It was all very last minute, a deal too good to pass up." "How wonderful," I said. "Where are you going?" "Paris," she breathed, the word draped in glamour. "Can you believe it? We leave on Wednesday." "Paris," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That is a special trip." I looked at Michael. He finally met my eyes, and I saw the guilt there, plain as day. He knew. He knew how the tickets were paid for, and he had said nothing. My heart didn't break. It hardened, just a little. It was a necessary armor. "It's our anniversary soon," he mumbled, not looking at Tasha. "We wanted to do something special." "I see," I said. Later, while I was in the kitchen clearing plates, Tasha came in, leaning against the counter. She was on her phone, scrolling through pictures. "I already have all my outfits planned," she said, more to herself than to me. "I found the most perfect little Chanel-inspired jacket. It'll be amazing for pictures by the Eiffel Tower." She sighed contentedly. "I just feel like we deserve this, you know? A real escape. No kids, no work, just luxury." I continued to rinse the dishes, the warm water running over my hands. I said nothing. My silence seemed to unnerve her. She put her phone down. "Are you okay, Mama Lorraine?" she asked, a slight edge to her voice. "You've been quiet tonight." "Just tired, dear," I replied, not turning around. "A lot on my mind." "Well, you should take a trip yourself sometime," she offered brightly. "You've spent your whole life sending other people on vacation. It's your turn." The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a knife. "Perhaps I will," I said softly. Before they left, while Michael was getting the kids' coats, Tasha's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to answer it, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. I was walking toward the living room and couldn't help but overhear. Her back was to me. "I know, girl, I can't believe it either," she was saying, a giddy laugh in her voice. "It's all taken care of. A completely free vacation, you know how it is." A pause. "Oh, she has no idea. She won't even check her statement before we leave. We'll be in the air sipping champagne before she even knows what happened." That was it. That was the moment the last shred of doubt dissolved. The moment certainty settled in my bones, cold and heavy as lead. It wasn't just entitlement. It was contempt. She saw me as a faded, benevolent ghost haunting a house full of assets, a resource to be managed. She had mistaken my kindness for blindness, and that was a mistake I could not allow to stand. When she came back into the room, her face was flushed with excitement. She gave me another airy hug. "Thank you for dinner, Mama. It was wonderful, as always." "You're welcome, Tasha," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Have a safe flight." On Monday morning, I sat at the small desk in my spare bedroom. This had been my home office for years, a neat, organized space where I kept my files and my memories. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I still knew by heart, the private line for Platinum Medallion supervisors at the airline. It was a perk of the trade, a number not available to the public. A woman with a calm, professional voice answered. "Platinum Services, this is Cynthia. How may I help you?" "Hello, Cynthia," I began, my tone measured and professional. "My name is Lorraine Bishop. I'm a retired agent, and I need some guidance on a sensitive matter regarding a booking." I gave her the confirmation number. I could hear the soft clicking of her keyboard. "I have the reservation right here," she confirmed. 2 first-class passengers, Bishop, Michael, and Tasha, departing Houston for Paris on Wednesday." "That's correct," I said. "Cynthia, I am the card holder for this reservation. The card was used without my authorization by my daughter-in-law." There was a brief silence on the line. "I see," she said, her voice taking on a careful, more formal tone. "Ma'am, if a fraudulent charge has been made, your first step should be to contact your credit card company and report it." "I understand that," I said calmly, "and I will. but I am interested in my options at the point of departure. The passengers are my family. I want to handle this with discretion, but I cannot allow this charge to stand." I could almost hear her thinking, processing the unusual request. I was not a typical victim of fraud. I was not hysterical or demanding. I was asking about process. "You're the primary card holder?" she asked. "Yes, the card is in my name, Lorraine Bishop." "And you will be at the airport on the day of departure?" "I will." She paused again. "There is a procedure," she said slowly, "though it is not commonly used. It's called a cardholder authorization review. If the cardholder presents themselves at the check-in counter or the departure gate and disputes the charge, we are required to place an immediate hold on the ticket issuance. The passengers cannot board until payment is verified with a different card, or the original cardholder verbally reauthorizes the transaction in person." My heart gave a quiet, steady thump. It was exactly what I had hoped for. "So, to be clear," I said, wanting no room for error, "if I am at the gate when they are called to board, I can stop it?" "You can initiate a review that will prevent them from boarding, yes," Cynthia confirmed. "The gate agent will be alerted by a flag on the reservation. They will have to step aside and the tickets will be suspended pending payment verification. It would effectively cancel their travel unless they can produce another form of payment for the full, last-minute fare," which, I knew, would be nearly double the original price, an amount they certainly could not afford. "And this can be done quietly?" I asked. "The agent is trained to be discreet," she said, "but I cannot guarantee the reaction of the passengers, ma'am." "I can," I said softly. "Thank you, Cynthia. You've been very helpful. Please place a note on the file, reference my name, and state that the cardholder may be requesting an in-person authorization review at the gate. No need to flag it red yet, just a supervisor's note." "I can do that," she said. I heard her typing again. "The note is in the record. I'm sorry you're having to go through this, Mrs. Bishop." "Sometimes you just have to handle your own business," I replied. "Thank you again." I hung up the phone. A deep, quiet resolve settled over me. Tasha thought she was flying to Paris. She had no idea she was flying straight into a wall of her own making, and I would be there to make sure she didn't miss it. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. The world outside my windows continued as normal. The mail truck made its rounds. My neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. The familiar rhythm of the neighborhood went on. But inside my house, I was in a bubble of preparation. I did not feel angry. I felt focused, like I was planning the most important trip of my life. Michael called me on Tuesday evening. His voice was bright with a false cheer that grated on my nerves. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. We're all packed and ready to go tomorrow." "That's good to hear, Michael," I said. My voice was placid, a calm lake he couldn't see the bottom of. "Tasha's so excited she's been running around like a teenager," he laughed, but it sounded hollow. I wanted to thank you again. For this. It means a lot." The lie was so bald, so clumsy. He was thanking me for a gift he knew I hadn't given. He was a willing accomplice swept along by his wife's ambition and his own weakness. I felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it was like a physical pain. This was my son, the little boy I had taught to be honest, to have a strong moral compass. Robert would have been so ashamed. "A trip to Paris is a very special thing," I said, my words chosen with care. "I hope you both find what you're looking for there." "Yeah, well, we'll bring you back something nice," he said, rushing to fill the silence. "That won't be necessary," I told him. "You just have a memorable trip." He said goodbye, promising to call from Paris. I hung up the phone and felt the weight of his complicity settle on my shoulders. This was no longer just about Tasha's deception. It was about my son's failure to stand up for what was right. The foundation Robert and I had built was meant for him to build upon, not to stand by and watch as his wife dismantled it for a first-class ticket. On Wednesday, the day of the flight, I woke up early. I went about my morning routine with deliberate care. I watered my ferns, I read a chapter of my book, I drank my tea. I was not nervous. I was ready. The flight was scheduled to depart at 4:35 p.m. I knew they would plan to arrive at the airport around 2 o'clock. Boarding for an international flight begins early. I planned to be there before them. I dressed carefully. I chose a simple but elegant navy blue dress, a string of my good pearls, and comfortable, low-heeled shoes. I did not want to look like a woman scorned. I wanted to look like what I was, a woman in control of her own affairs. I packed a small tote bag with my book, a bottle of water, and my wallet, which contained the credit card in question. At 1 o'clock, I called a car service. I did not want to deal with the hassle of airport parking. As I locked the front door behind me, the sun was bright and the air was warm. It was a beautiful day for a reckoning. The international terminal at George Bush Intercontinental was a hive of controlled chaos. People from every corner of the world hurried past, pulling roller bags, speaking in a dozen different languages. The air smelled of jet fuel and coffee. For a moment, the old professional instincts took over. I noted the length of the security lines, the efficiency of the check-in counters. I had spent so much of my life in these spaces. They felt like a second home. I found the gate for the Air France flight to Paris. It was in Terminal D, a wide, airy space with massive windows overlooking the tarmac. I chose a seat across from the boarding gate, close enough to see everything but not so close as to be immediately obvious. I settled in, opened my book, and I waited. At 2:15, I saw them. They were walking down the concourse, Tasha in the lead, pulling a stylish, cream-colored suitcase. She was wearing white linen trousers, a designer t-shirt, and oversized sunglasses pushed on top of her head. She looked like an advertisement for a luxury lifestyle. Michael trailed a step behind her, pulling his own bag, his face a mask of weary excitement. They were laughing about something. They looked happy, untouchable. They didn't see me. They went straight to the counter to check their bags, Tasha chatting animatedly with the agent. I watched as the agent tagged their luggage and sent it down the conveyor belt. Headed for a plane they would never board. The dramatic irony was not lost on me. After checking their bags, they found seats closer to the gate. Tasha immediately took out her phone, no doubt composing a post for her social media followers. Off to Paris, #blessed second honeymoon. Michael stared out the window at the planes, a distant look in his eyes. For a moment, I felt a surge of pity for him. He looked like a man being carried along by a current too strong for him to fight. But pity was a luxury I could not afford right now. He had made his choice. I stayed where I was, a quiet, unassuming older woman reading a book. No one would have given me a second glance. I was invisible, and in that moment my invisibility was my greatest strength. I watched the clock on the terminal wall. 3 o'clock, 3:30, 3:45. The gate agents made an announcement preparing for pre-boarding. Families with small children and passengers needing extra assistance were invited to come forward. At 4 o'clock, Tasha finally saw me. She had stood up to stretch, and her eyes scanned the waiting area. They passed over me once, then snapped back, her body going rigid with surprise. Her smile vanished, replaced by a tight, confused frown. She nudged Michael, who followed her gaze. His face went pale. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Slowly, they walked over to me. I closed my book, keeping my finger on my page, and looked up at them. "Mama Lorraine!" Tasha's voice was high and strained. "What on earth are you doing here? Did you come to surprise us?" "In a way," I said calmly. "I just wanted to see you off." Michael couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the floor just past my shoes. "Mom, you really didn't have to do that. We were fine." "I'm sure you were," I said. My gaze was fixed on Tasha. She shifted her weight, the picture of discomfort. Her composure was beginning to crack at the edges. "Well, this is so sweet of you," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you should get home. It's a long drive." Just then, the gate agent's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Good afternoon, passengers. We are now ready to begin boarding Air France Flight 693 with nonstop service to Paris. We would like to invite our first-class passengers, as well as our Sky Priority members, to board at this time. Relief flooded Tasha's face. This was her escape. "Oh, that's us," she said, her voice overly bright. She grabbed her expensive carry-on bag. "It was so good to see you, Mama. We'll call you when we land." She leaned in for a hug, but I didn't move. She stopped, her gesture awkward and unfinished. She turned to Michael. "Come on, honey, they're calling us." Michael hesitated, looking from me to her. He was trapped. "It's already paid for," Tasha said, her voice sharp with impatience, directed more at me than at him. She thought my presence was a silent judgment on their extravagance, not a prelude to an intervention. She turned and strode toward the boarding lane, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Michael gave me one last miserable look and followed her. I stood up, my book still in my hand, and walked calmly to the gate agent's counter. Tasha handed her boarding pass to the agent with a flourish. The agent, a young woman with a polite, professional smile, scanned it. Beep. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Bishop," she said. Then it was Michael's turn. He handed over his pass. As the agent reached for it, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quiet but clear. It cut through the low hum of the gate area. The agent looked up, surprised. Tasha, who had been about to step through the gate, froze and turned around, her eyes wide. "My name is Lorraine Bishop," I said, looking directly at the gate agent. "I am the card holder for the payment on booking reference ZY74K2. The card ends in 8842. I am here to request an immediate cardholder authorization review." I spoke the words calmly, just as I had rehearsed them in my mind. They were technical, devoid of emotion, but they landed in the quiet space with the force of a thunderclap. The agent's professional smile faltered. Her eyes flickered from me to her computer screen. She knew what this meant. She typed a few keys. I saw her expression change. The supervisor's note. Her face became a polite, impenetrable mask. "I'm sorry, sir," she said to Michael, holding his boarding pass. "Ma'am," she said to Tasha, "there seems to be an issue with the payment on your reservation. I'm going to have to ask you to please step to the side." The silence that followed was absolute. The line of other first-class passengers behind them came to a halt. Everyone was staring. Tasha's face, which had been flushed with triumphant excitement, drained of all color. She looked as if she'd been struck. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you talking about? There's no issue. The tickets are paid for." She shot a venomous look at me. "The system has placed a hold on your tickets, pending payment verification," the agent said, her voice firm but low. She was handling it by the book with as much discretion as the situation allowed. "You will not be able to board at this time." Michael looked at me, his face a portrait of pure, unadulterated shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew. It was all over. Tasha finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "I don't understand what's happening. We have a flight to catch." "I believe I can explain," I said, my voice still quiet. I turned to face her fully. The other passengers were murmuring now, their curiosity piqued. "The trip was charged to my credit card, Tasha, without my permission. That is the issue." The color that had drained from her face came rushing back in a hot, mottled blush. Humiliation. It was an ugly thing to witness, even on the face of someone who had so thoroughly earned it. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. She had no words. There was no lie big enough to cover this. "The charge for $11,432 will not be authorized," I continued, my voice level. "If you still wish to fly to Paris, you will need to purchase new tickets." I looked from her to my son. "With your own money." The gate agent, eager to de-escalate, spoke into her microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a slight delay in our boarding process. We appreciate your patience." She gestured for another agent to take over the scanner, and then turned her attention back to Michael and Tasha. "Sir, ma'am, if you'll please come with me to the customer service desk, we can try to sort this out." Tasha stood frozen, her designer handbag clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Her grand Parisian adventure had collapsed into a sordid little scene at a departure gate in Houston. All her carefully constructed images, her curated posts, her performance of effortless luxury, all of it had evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights of the airport. She was just a woman who had tried to steal from her mother-in-law and been caught. I had done what I came to do. I did not need to see the rest. I did not need to watch them fumble for explanations or try to salvage their pride. My part in their drama was over. I gave Michael one last long look. It was not a look of anger, but of sorrow. He flinched, as if I had physically struck him, and finally dropped his gaze to the floor. I turned, my back straight, and walked away. I did not look back. I walked down the long concourse, the sounds of the airport gradually swallowing the small pocket of silence and shame I had left behind me. As I stepped out into the warm Houston air to wait for my car, I felt not triumph, but a profound and weary sense of peace. The foundation was cracked, yes, but my part of it was secure. The call came 2 days later. It was Michael. I was in my garden tending to my roses when the phone rang. I saw his name on the screen and took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Michael." "Mom?" His voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to defeat. "We're back home." "I see," I said, snipping a dead leaf from a rose bush. There was a long silence. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line. I waited. This was his silence to fill, not mine. "I am so sorry," he finally said, the words sounding rusty, unused. "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say." "You could have said something before, Michael," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "You could have said no to your wife. You could have told me the truth when you called on Tuesday." "I know," he whispered. "I know. I messed up. I let her. I just went along with it. It was wrong. There's no excuse." "No," I agreed. "There isn't. Tasha is... she's a wreck," he said. "She's barely come out of our room. Her parents had to come pick up the kids from school yesterday." I felt a brief, unwelcome flicker of sympathy, but it passed. "Consequences are a difficult thing to face when you're not used to them," I said. "What she did was unforgivable," he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "And what I did, by letting her, was just as bad. I broke your trust, Mom. I know that. I hope one day you can forgive me." I thought about his words. Forgiveness. It felt like a distant country I wasn't ready to visit yet. "Forgiveness and trust are two different things, Michael," I told him. "Trust is a foundation. It takes a long time to build, and it's very easy to break. Right now, our foundation is broken." He was silent. He knew I was right. "I've already spoken to the credit card company," I continued, my voice all business now. "The charge has been fully reversed. I have also gone through all of my accounts. Your name and Tasha's have been removed as authorized users from everything. The stored payment information on all of your online accounts has been deleted. The financial support is over, Michael. The trips, the down payments, the safety net, it's gone." It sounded harsh, even to my own ears, but it was necessary. It was the only language Tasha and now apparently Michael would understand. "I understand, Mom," he said quietly. "I deserve that. We deserve that. What you and Tasha do from this point on is your own business," I said, bringing the conversation to a close. "You are a grown man. You have a family. It's time you build your own foundation. One based on honesty and hard work, not on someone else's generosity." "I will," he said. "I promise." We said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone and looked at the rose I had just clipped, a beautiful deep red blossom. It was perfect. I took it inside and placed it in a small bud vase on my kitchen table. The house was quiet. It no longer felt like a stage or a family hub. It felt like mine again. A few months passed. The autumn leaves began to turn, and a welcome coolness settled over the city. I did not hear much from Michael or Tasha, and I did not press for contact. I saw my grandchildren when Michael brought them over on his own one Saturday afternoon. There was an unspoken agreement that Tasha would not come. The visit was awkward at first, but Jackson and Maya were, as always, a delight. They told me about school and their friends, and for a few hours things felt almost normal. Michael looked older, thinner. He was trying, I could see that. Trying to be the man his father had always hoped he would be. It would be a long road. One morning I sat down at my desk, the same desk where I'd uncovered the truth about the trip to Paris, and I opened my laptop. But this time, I wasn't investigating anyone. I was planning. I browsed cruise line websites looking at itineraries for Alaska. I had always wanted to see the glaciers, to watch the whales breach in the cold, clear water. Robert and I had talked about going one day, but we had always put it off. There was always something else: a mortgage payment, college tuition, a wedding, family. I found a cruise that looked perfect, a 7-day trip out of Seattle, with stops in Juneau and Skagway. I looked at the staterooms, the shore excursions, the onboard amenities. I pulled out my own credit card, the one with the new number, and I booked a single cabin with a balcony. The confirmation email arrived a moment later, a tidy string of letters and numbers that felt like a promise. A few weeks later, my new suitcase was packed and standing by the front door. It was smaller than the ones I used to pack for the family vacations, lighter. It held only what I needed. As I waited for the car to take me to the airport, I looked around my quiet house. It was peaceful. It was mine. The foundation was still there, solid under my feet. I had been reminded that a foundation is not just for others to stand on. It's also for you to launch from. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to fly.